We were driving down Memorial Drive westbound, and we were in the one lane, and we were creeping along with the traffic. It would stop and start, stop and start. And I look over to this vehicle that was right beside us, and I'm thinking, you know, this guy is just, he can't believe that there's two women in a car together. And so he's watching us, and I'm thinking, he's gonna smash into the car in front of him. And so we continue on, and sure enough, he smashes into the car in front of him, and then we pick up the radio. It's like, we got an on view 02 here, we'll take care of it. So it was, I suppose, and I think some of the other girls will agree. I mean, I think that people thought it was like we were like the exotic creatures in the zoo or something. So I had this lofty idea as a young girl in a small town of 750 people that I was going to eventually become a police officer. So I came across the criminal justice program in Calgary, and off I went to the big city.
Even in the time I was in Scotland, my mum and dad always said that I wanted to become a police officer.
I got to know some of these women that were sworn members and the civilian members playing on this basketball team, and I was just so blown away by how amazing they were. That's how I made my decision. I thought, you know what, I think this is something I'd like to do. I'd like to be them when I grow up.
I saw these folks getting paid to ride their bikes on the mountain bike unit, and I raced mountain bikes for a while. And I thought, oh man, I'd have died and go to heaven if I could get paid and ride my bike and do some policing downtown.
Congratulations, you are in Class 116, and you will start in October of 1995. I hung that phone up and I thought, did I absolutely just hear that correctly?
My first polygraph, there were 11 questions. I did fine. The second one, there's now 110 questions. And he has a clipboard, and he starts asking, and I go, oh. And about question 40, have you ever forced someone to have sex with you? I said, how would I do that? Would I tape it to a pencil? The next question was, have you ever had any sexual activity that would embarrass the Calgary Police Service? I went, what's your standard? He was just playing with me, but I did pass. So those are some of the initials. So you're not even on the job yet, and you're seeing what this is about.
There was maybe 5 of us on the department at that time. We didn't really have a rank. It was just policewoman.
Well, when I first started, policewomen didn't have a police car. They walked.
It would be often shoplifting complaints, juvenile complaints, runaway children. It would often be mental warrants where women were involved, so you were more like an escort or you could search.
I remember one woman, she came in and they suspected her, the drug unit suspected her of having swallowed some balloons of narcotics. So they had to wait for that to move on through. So a policewoman had to sit there with her. Not on my shift, but thank God.
Our role was just restricted. And also the pay was different. So we were paid less.
The person in charge of recruiting, and I'm not going to say who it was, he said, you're pretty darn lucky that you were hired, because if I had my choice, there wouldn't be any policewomen on this job. And he said, I don't think you can physically handle it.
And then there was people that would say, I'd get out of the car by myself, and they'd say, well, we want a real policeman. So you had to sometimes convince the community that it was okay to talk to us.
There was men that didn't want to work with a woman, and there was men that we didn't care if we worked with either.
For a lot of us women, you had to survive. And in order to survive, you needed to fit in with the men. You need to be like the men.
I spent probably the first 10 years just trying to fit in. And so for me, that fitting in included a very systematic defeminization process. So I act like one of the guys, I talk like one of the guys, I drank like one of the guys.
You had to be resilient, and whether that was right or wrong, you know what? I was brought up in a culture that don't ever cry.
I kept my mouth shut and I worked hard. And I did everything that was asked of me, but went beyond that as well.
You got to have a reputation of being reliable, because there are some people, and some of the women, who wouldn't. They'd get in the patrol car and lock the doors and wouldn't be out there helping, so you had to do those things.
There's a lot of girls that couldn't handle it and ended up not being on the job.
We had to prove ourselves. I know that once I proved myself and would roll my sleeves up and get down into a bar fight and help my partner out, that then we were accepted.
It was harder for policewomen in many ways, but in a lot of ways it was an advantage too, because the men were so afraid of us. Yeah. If you had a sergeant that was a male and you started to just look like you were about to cry, he would change his mind.
For as much as you can say that being a woman might have disadvantaged in certain circumstances, the reality is that there are also advantages. I don't mean just by gender, but what it causes you internally to do. You become very self-reliant. You trust your gut instincts. Those are the kinds of things that you develop, and you develop strategies.
We had snaps on our shirt when I first joined the job. And one guy walks up to me and just ripped my shirt open. I punched him in the nose. No, I just wanted to see if you were wearing a vest. Ha 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 ha. Everybody laughs. Oh well, until I punched him.
Terry and I had to hide that we were dating because you couldn't do that on the department. They used to make one of the pair quit.
I didn't get married while I was on the force. Yeah. But we lived together in sin for quite a number of years.
When I first joined a night shift, I did not sleep. You can imagine, because I'd get home and I had a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old. So I was sleep deprived for those first 4 or 5 years.
There was a gas station between Cochrane and Calgary that we used to do the kid exchange.
When I was pregnant with my twins, I was high risk, so I was working at one of the front counters, and I would work there in a big blue ugly overall smock by myself. Shortly after I had my kids, I thought that wasn't smart. There I was pregnant all by myself. I was a police officer. I wasn't carrying a weapon.
I remember being told by a very high-ranking officer at one stage of my career, not in Calgary, but when I was out east, that I had to go to the FBI Academy. It was something that if you were at certain levels of the organization, you needed to do. I've just had a baby, and maybe we could think about sending me away for 3 months at this stage. And the answer to me was, I want to know whether this job or your new baby is more important.
I'm in arrest processing, and we get a new sergeant, and it started. The harassment, the discrimination, the bullying. And I went to the staff sergeant and said, this can't carry on. He said, he's your sergeant, you'll do what he tells you. And finally one day, I had it. I was absolutely done. I was finished. And I went up and I said, Deputy, a penis is no longer important. And I said, this has got to stop, or else I have to go to the city and lodge a complaint,
or Human Rights Commission, or I'm going to quit and I'm going to make it a very media event, but something's got to change. So I come to work. The staff sergeant calls me in and he's just furious. I've been told that things will go back to normal. I said, that's fine, I said, and I expected an apology from Sergeant so. You will not get that. I said, well then don't expect me to respect him.
My staff sergeant was weak and there were bullies in the unit. And my partner and I were targeted. We were doing some really good work, they weren't. And we were selected to go to homicide for a 6-month secondment, and they weren't. And it led to some very unprofessional behavior, you know, talking behind our back, criticizing our work, criticizing even the way we dressed. It was just ridiculous. I worked with remarkable men, and these clowns that I was telling you about, they're a small percentage.
If you were joined the Masons, you were in the Inn Club. If you had a British accent, you got promoted. Of course, that wasn't open to women, so you struggled along on your own.
Even as a junior officer, I said to myself, I have to get to a position where I can change those things. The drive was to build on the whole community policing framework and what that means, and the drive to remove the kinds of barriers that existed.
My last few years were tough because I was working on the gender equity work, and it was really hard to be sort of that loud, you know, pounding on the table voice saying we have to do this, we have to do this, we can't do that because it's not fair, we can't treat people that way. And I was pretty unpopular. You know, people don't like you, or people think you're a bully, or people think you're too abrasive, and people think that you should take a softer approach to this issue. There were a number of times in the last couple of years where I considered quitting.
And you question a lot of things that happen, but you have control over some and you don't have control over others. Your challenge is always to, how do I work around that? I remember being told, do not cry at a death. And I think if a police officer is coming into my home, I would rather have someone who would have an ability to empathize than have someone that's a robot.
He beat his children with a garden hose to the point where 2 of them were black and blue from their ears down to their ankles. But when we went to court, like I said, I screwed up with the witness, and the father got to very probation and go home with the family. And some years later, there was a report of about an infant girl death, and it was the same family. I don't think they could prove that it was not an accident, but I know it wasn't an accident. And I've always, if I'd have handled it better the first time, we might have actually gotten those kids taken away, but I didn't. That one sticks a lot.
I remember we were walking up the pathway to the home of a woman, and it was Mother's Day. And she knew before we got to the door what we were there to tell her. It was actually a look between a 17-year-old and her son, an 18-year-old, at a party, and that's all it took for the fight. There was one of the kids at the party that comforted their son while he was dying. And so the young man had told this person, tell them that I love them. So it's hard to tell the family what had happened.
It was a challenge when we had to attend autopsies, especially young children or babies. That was pretty difficult to accept.
I had one particularly bad summer that culminated with a young boy, about 14 years old, being set on fire by a group of friends. And my partner and I went to the hospital with him and just sat with him and his parents while he died. So there was that, and then about 4 days later we went to a house in Erin Woods where somebody had shot somebody and stuffed him in a freezer. And that house was just covered in blood. And so those two events, cumulatively, my partner and I started to talk about how we couldn't sleep, we weren't eating, and then we got a call for some guy who was, I think, just passed out on the side of the road. But as we were driving there, I was almost crying, thinking, God, please don't let him be dead. I can't deal with another dead person this week.
Well, I know it was October 8th, 1993. It was in the early evening. I got a call from Inspector Barnes, and he advised me to come down to the police station in 6th District right away. There'd been a terrible accident. So I got in my car and I drove down there. I had no idea that it was not an accident, it was actually a death of one of my constables. He was intentionally run over and killed by this young offender in a stolen car. And I remember going out to the scene, and I remember seeing body bags laying on his different parts because he was so badly injured. Lisa, of course, was one of my concerns because Lisa was his partner. She stayed at my place because she couldn't close her eyes without seeing what she'd seen. So I looked after her, but I also had a zone of 18 constables that were grieving and confused and trying to cope and do their job. I mean, you come back and you tell these guys that their partner, comrade, colleague, was brutally murdered, and then you go to your shift the next day. So that was the darkest time in my career.
I remember where I was sitting in the forensic unit when we heard that Darren Beattie was tragically shot in a training accident. So my head was going, okay, if I respond to that scene, that means that the following day I'm going to have to go to the autopsy. And I knew this is where the clinics comes in. I knew I couldn't do that. So I threw my hands in the air and I said, I can't do that. Someone else had to do it, and I felt bad that I couldn't go and do that scene and look after Darren and his family and take care of that, but I just couldn't do it. I couldn't go to an autopsy with an officer.
I said to my sister one time, I know too much. Sometimes the world is not a nice place. You had to be able to come over that. You know, luckily I did, by using sense of humor and trying different things, being creative, writing. I wrote books and did artwork, and that was my yoga for dealing with the stress. But some of that stuff didn't come out till many years later because you didn't dare crack.
Just the attitude, and it was with the guys too, just chin up and take whatever, and that kind of attitude. You have to have a really good sense of humor because just to deal with what you're dealing with. You have to have an off-colored sense of humor, a little bit, because you spend all day dealing with all sorts of things you don't want to remember, and you just want to have a good time and laugh a little bit.
This guy was drunk. He was in his white beater t-shirt they used to describe him as, and probably pretty fitting for the situation, but he was pretty angry and he was looking for a fight. And Tom said, well, you don't need to worry about me, you need to worry about my partner, because she's PMSing right now. I laughed and I laughed, but I thought, are you kidding me?
My partner went to pepper spray and I got some of the overspray, and I didn't let go of the slippery guy until we got him handcuffed, but in the meantime, I vomited on their carpet.
There was probably hijinks, but we in turn carried out some of our own, I think.
Baby powder was put into vents.
Sticking a bunny on the sergeant's front bumper.
Lubricant was put all over the windshield wipers.
Grease the door handle of your car with black grease, and you go and you get it greased all over your face.
I opened the door one morning, pulled my typewriter's stand out, and a chicken flew out.
So he leapt out the back door. I went running after him, and modesty sort of at that point left me, and so I kind of hiked up my skirt so I could increase my stride, and I caught up with him and took him down, actually, and brought him back in. It's just an example of how the skirt was really not appropriate.
They were doing the same work. When I first started, policewomen they always had to wear skirts.
I don't need a skirt, don't even bother. I'm never going to wear it, waste of money.
And shoes with heels about 2 inches high.
And the nuns wear those shoes, and I'm not having anything to do with that.
Bearberry coat, a snub-nosed revolver that we carried in our purse.
That is the ugliest purse I've ever seen in my life.
We had some clothing issues.
You go to a call or a complaint or an incident, and invariably, whoever would defer to the man because he had the uniform that looked like a policeman. I looked like the mail lady, the Salvation Army lady. I didn't look like a police officer because the hat.
So they must have put us through 20 different styles of hats.
The men would always be doing something with your hat.
Flatten them and stick them in pigeonholes and put them in the freezers.
Dents in it, you know, they would hide it, they would sit on it.
Or steal them and
we had to go buy hats.
And they would charge you for the hat. It took years to fight that war, I'm telling you, to get the same type of hat as what was issued to the men.
Well, Norma, her boyfriend at the time was a leather worker, so he made us a mini gun belt.
I cannot verify that.
And I got called into the chief's office. They were having a clothing meeting. So I walk in and they're all sitting there, and Chief Sawyer, I remember his half glass, he's looking at his, and then he looks at me, and then he looks. The pants I approved. I don't think I approved the equipment belt. Well, sir, maybe you should. And the end of the meeting, his decision was women will have the complete same uniform as everybody else.
When they started to wear uniforms, they could wrestle people to the ground or whatever they had to do to arrest people.
It might seem like a small step, but the truth is, once you do have a gun, once you've got the same uniform with literally the same hat, it really does make it more clear that you are equal.
The advice I got from a policewoman that I met early on the job said, if you get into a fight, you better be hurt as bad, if not more, than your partner, just to show that you were capable and that you would stay in the fight.
One of the partners of one of the bikers took exception to me, and we got into that was the first fist fight I got into. My partner just stood there and watched me, but turned out okay.
Was running behind this guy in our high heels and leather pants, and we managed to get a push on the back of him as he was running. And he went down to his stomach, and we jumped on him and cuffed him up. We picked him up, and he had defecated himself. I don't know if it was that because we both landed on him or if he was stressed, but then we found out he was a serious habitual offender out of Toronto, sexual offender. The fact that we squashed him and made him himself was awesome.
We pulled up to a bar fight in front of the Regis downtown, and two of our big, huge, husky beat walkers were getting that. Their ties are open, their shirts are ripped off. So we pull up, and I get out of the car, and all of a sudden this big guy's holding the policeman up against the wall, and he looks and he says, "Hey, you're really beautiful. Can I go with you?"
There's a conference outside the bar about how to deal with Frenchie Joe. Everybody looks at me and says, you know, Frenchie likes the ladies, Bonnie. I walk in and I said, hello, Mr. Lavertu. May I sit with you? Oui, you know, we're going to have to go, Mr. Lavertu. Yes, I know. So, finish my beer. So he finishes and he smashes on the table. It shatters. I peed myself. Not a lot, just, you know. I put my arm in his arm and we walk out and the whole bar starts to applaud.
This fellow had just blasted through a red light downtown, and I wheeled up on my bike, my kickstand knocked on his window, and he had the startled look, and I just said, pull over. I just thought that was just amazing, to pull over a car on my bike.
One time there was one of the policewomen on a Friday evening, she was working by herself, and the deputy chief came and asked me if I would ride along in the car with her because she couldn't go out on the street if she didn't have somebody in the car with her. So I worked all day, and then I worked a whole shift with her. Our job description was always, and other duties as required.
I was a school resource officer at Forest Lawn High School. And when I was in high school, at Western Canada High School, I won the Cecil M. Brownlee Bursary Award. And I was very proud of that, because it was a big deal. And so I was at Forest Lawn, they had their awards night, and there was a student who had won the Cecil M. Brownlee Award. And so I got to present it to this girl. And it just really touched me, the circle. And I got a standing ovation from all the audience, the parents and the students, and that one just touched me here.
This young girl, she would have been about 15, 16 years of age. She ended up getting tangled up with a couple of our targets. So over time, we got to know her, this lovely, sweet girl. We just continued to spend some time with her to ensure that she was not going to reoffend with them. When I was in 3 District, probably in the year 2000, I could hear my name called asking me to come down to the front counter. And here this girl is, I'm telling you about, she's standing there with a bouquet of flowers for me. And she said, just so sincerely, she said, Glenna, I just want to thank you for everything that you have done for me. You've changed my life. You and Colin have changed my life.
The policewomen get-togethers were vital. And they started right from when I first joined, and it was PW number 12, and there was 12 of us.
And some of the guys would say to me, why do you have to have a dinner? I said, well, actually, you play hockey with our inspector. They were bonded in many different ways, you know, the rodeo, the Masons, and us women were not invited to that party.
So when there was more police women who came, it was like a support group.
For the networking, for the I'm okay, you're okay. It's them that are crazy.
This was our way of celebrating ourselves. I think we learned a lot from each other and from those that went before us.
As far as actual patrol, I think Donna and I were probably the first to be teamed up together.
It was a big deal for me to get HR. It was a big deal for you to go into robbery.
My goal on this job was to become a homicide detective. I got it, but it took me 18 years to get into that position.
First female superintendent, incredible honor, but it was the job that I got to do and how I got to work with others, and all of the projects that we worked on and the accomplishments that we made were more important to me than what the rank was.
Joan, she was the first one in K-9.
There was only 2 guys that would train with me. And then one of the guys finally got a petition to say, we don't want you there. So it got taken to the inspector, Eric Franklin, lovely man, and the guy who took it to him placed it on the inspector's desk, and the inspector looked at it and said, so, where do you want to transfer to? Because I'm keeping Joan. So he was out. So that sent a signal to everybody.
In my career, there was a lot of men that actually supported me. And they put me with partners that even sort of said, I'm not working with a woman. So, but the supervisor did that, and they stood behind me.
I wasn't allowed to be promoted to sergeant. After all, what kind of man would want to work for a woman? I said, okay, well, can I write the examination? So I said to myself, all right, I am going to get the best mark that's ever been got on these examinations, and then they're going to have a problem. I studied like anything and did get the top mark. So eventually I got promoted to sergeant. The reality is that had I not been a woman, I wouldn't have developed the kinds of strategies in terms of approaching the job of chief of police.
When Christine Silverberg was first announced, I remember walking, I was working in headquarters at the time, to my car that night, and I don't know why, but I walked. I noticed my shoulders were a little, and I walked a little bit differently. I didn't know her, I didn't know if she was going to be good for the organization, but I just remember thinking, yes.
The police commission of the day had a very strong change agenda. It wasn't as though anybody could articulate really what needed changing. It was, we need change. What I did when I started was to really listen to what the people in the organization were saying with respect to what needed changing.
And she knew about the Good Old Boys Club, and the Good Old Boys Club was not happy.
Any chief of police, man or woman, has a percentage of people within the organization whose intent is to naysay, to create distraction, to make you fail. There were people who certainly did not want a woman chief of police. There were others that simply didn't want somebody from the East. I had learned in my career to work through, not just work through, drive through the distraction of all of that and keep your focus on what it is that you're supposed to be doing.
Policewomen, we had lots of social things. We had a minimum of one big get-together a year, and we stayed very connected. And she wouldn't really come to those affairs, or she'd come and she'd be extremely aloof.
I think she went out of her way not to favor policewomen, so she wouldn't look like she was just promoting women.
It wasn't that because I was a woman chief, I was now going to support women over other people. No. What I was interested in was creating and leading the kind of systemic change that was needed to have people have the opportunities to succeed.
I was encouraged by Chief Silverberg at the time to apply for inspector because there'd never been a female inspector before. And God bless her, she put me in charge of an area I'd never been in or never knew anything about, and that was organized crime.
You know, she had some challenges, but I have nothing but respect for the people who made that decision and for her in fighting the fight she fought and taking us along for the ride.
Whether it's a police officer that remembers or whether it's somebody calling me 20 some odd years later saying, I remember when you were chief and I know I can trust you, those kinds of things. And that means a lot to me. There will be people who say, well, your legacy is that you were the first woman chief of a major city in Canada. And I say, no, my legacy is that I came across the country into an organization and a community and listened to the people and tried to lead a police agency that was responsive to both the community and to the officers in the organization, and I think that I did that.
The whole issue of changing a culture, I think you need both approaches. You need people who have that softer approach, but you also need people who are going to push it, otherwise it won't happen.
We're still having a lot of work to do to change how women support and advocate for one another. Like I say, I think we're in the mode of just surviving in a men's world, not thriving.
It's important for us to look after each other, to help each other, to pick each other up off the ground when things are really rough.
And when something goes wrong and we know it, to not be afraid to stand up and say, that was wrong, we need to fix it, how do we get better?
Too many people, I think, in life just accept what's going on. They don't feel as though they have a role to change that context, to move that context.
The world really is whatever is appealing to you as a female officer, because you can do it.
We must always be mindful to remember the shoulders on which we stand.
It was an evolution, but I think every time that a woman handles a job with complete competence, nobody's complaining.
Policing is not about you. Policing is about service.
If you do the right things for the right reasons, that will carry you throughout your career. So that would be my advice. And to have fun.
I mean, what other career could you, every X number of years, just change to something different?
You could start out with a day thinking you were going to do one thing and end up the day doing something altogether different.
The best fun I ever had was when I was on patrol.
Like all the practical jokes we played on each other, you just have to laugh. Get even, but laugh.
I had a lot of fun with my partners and with the Calgarians.
It was the best of my life, I think, the whole 25 years. I've never said to anyone, don't do it.
I've been asked, would you do it again? Knowing when that girl opened the drawer and she said, you want clerical or recruit, would you make that choice? And it's a yes.
Every day I see the beauty of life. And I don't think I'd see as much beauty as I see if I hadn't seen as much ugly as I see. And so I'm thankful for